Welcome, the anointed ones. Pay attention to the patterns people repeat. They are always telling you the ending in advance, just not in words. Here's the part nobody says out loud. Most unexpected outcomes are not unexpected at all. Studies in behavioral psychology have shown that human beings are incredibly predictable when placed in familiar emotional environments. Same triggers, same reactions, same insecurities, same decisions. Different day, same script, just a slightly different outfit. And yet, people still act shocked. That's what makes this moment so powerful, when someone in the group chat suddenly blurts out, "No way, you predicted all of this." Not because you're some kind of fortune teller, but because you refused to ignore what was right in front of everyone else. While they were busy explaining things away, you were quietly connecting dots. While they were hoping for a different outcome, you were calculating the most likely one. Let's be honest for a second. People don't actually hate being wrong. What they hate is realizing they could have seen it coming, but chose not to. That kind of realization stings a little deeper. It's like watching a movie twice and suddenly noticing all the clues you missed the first time. Except this time, you were sitting right next to someone who already knew the ending and didn't even need popcorn to enjoy it. And the funny part, when you tried to say something earlier, it probably got brushed off. Maybe you were told you were thinking too much, or reading into things, or, my personal favorite, it's not that deep. Then everything plays out exactly the way you said it would, and suddenly, silence turns into shock, and shock turns into respect they're trying to hide behind emojis. Because now they're not just reacting to what happened, they're reacting to you. They're realizing that while they were moving emotionally, you were observing structurally. While they were reacting to moments, you were studying patterns. And now the outcome didn't just prove a point, it exposed a gap in awareness, in honesty, in perception. This isn't about being right. It's about seeing clearly in spaces where most people prefer comfortable blindness. And once people realize you can do that, conversations with you start to feel a little different. Not louder, not dramatic, just more careful. Number 1, you didn't predict the future. You read the pattern. Nobody wanted to admit exists. Let's get something straight. You didn't wake up with some mystical ability to see tomorrow. What you did was far more uncomfortable than that. You paid attention when it would have been easier not to. You noticed the repeated behaviors, the same excuses recycled in different situations, the emotional reactions that followed a script so predictable it almost felt lazy. And instead of brushing it off like everyone else, you took it seriously. Most people don't miss patterns because they're blind. They miss them because they're invested. They need things to turn out differently, so they ignore the signs that say otherwise. You didn't have that luxury, or maybe you just refused it. You saw that when someone avoids accountability once, they'll do it again. When someone lies under pressure, they'll lie again when the stakes get higher. When someone shows inconsistency, it's not a phase, it's a preview. That's the part people don't want to admit. Patterns are uncomfortable because they remove the element of surprise people hide behind. If everything follows a pattern, then a lot of outcomes weren't accidents. They were consequences waiting their turn. And that realization hits harder than being wrong, because it means the truth was available early, just ignored. When you said what you saw, it probably didn't sound impressive at the time. It sounded inconvenient, maybe even annoying, because calling out a pattern forces people to make a decision, either confront it or keep pretending it's not there. Most choose the second option. It's easier to hope than to adjust. Then time passes. The same behaviors repeat. The same decisions lead to the same outcomes. And suddenly, what you said before doesn't sound negative anymore. It sounds accurate. That's when the shock kicks in. Not because you predicted anything magical, but because you respected the pattern when everyone else dismissed it. And now they're left trying to process how something so obvious in hindsight felt invisible in real time, while you were quietly treating it like basic information all along. Number 2, what shocks them isn't your accuracy, it's their own denial exposed. The reaction you get isn't really about how right you were. That's just the surface. What actually hits them is something deeper and a lot more uncomfortable. The realization that they saw pieces of the same truth and chose to ignore it. Your accuracy doesn't impress them as much as it exposes them, because if you could see it clearly, then it means the signs were there. And if the signs were there, then the only real question becomes, why didn't they take it seriously? That's where the discomfort begins. Nobody likes to admit that they overlooked something obvious, especially when it ends up costing them emotionally, mentally, or even socially. So when they say, "No way, you predicted all of this," there's a hidden layer behind it. It's not just shock, it's a quiet kind of embarrassment. Not loud enough to be called out, but strong enough to make them pause, because now they're replaying moments in their head. The red flags they laughed off, the gut feelings they ignored, the exact same things you pointed out that they dismissed as too much. And here's the part that really stings. You didn't force anything. You didn't manipulate the outcome. You just stayed honest about what you were seeing. That's what makes it harder for them to argue with. If you were dramatic or emotional about it, they could have written you off. But you weren't. You were calm, observant, certain in a way that didn't need validation. Now they're stuck dealing with two things at once, the situation itself and the realization that they had early access to the truth but didn't trust it. That kind of realization doesn't feel good. It humbles people quickly, and instead of saying all of that directly, it comes out in a simpler way. Disbelief, shock, sometimes even a nervous laugh. But underneath all of that is the same thought they won't say out loud. I saw it too, I just didn't want to believe it. Number 3, you notice small shifts that others dismiss as nothing. The difference between someone who predicts outcomes and someone who just reacts is in the details. You notice the tiny shifts that everyone else writes off as insignificant, a pause in their tone, a flicker of hesitation in their eyes, a sentence that doesn't match the energy behind it. Most people only pay attention when things explode, when problems become obvious, when chaos hits. You, on the other hand, are tuned into the tremors long before the earthquake arrives. Those little shifts are like breadcrumbs leading to the outcome. They're quiet, subtle, and easy to ignore, which is exactly why most people do. People don't notice them because they're too busy hoping everything will turn out the way they want, too invested in their comfort to see the truth. You, however, have trained yourself to track those signals without attaching judgment or wishful thinking to them. That's how you end up being right when others are scrambling. It isn't about being hypercritical or overanalyzing. It's about recognizing the patterns in human behavior, seeing the cause and effect relationships that repeat every single time, and acknowledging them without denial. When someone misses one tiny signal, they might stumble over the result later and be surprised. You see the same signal, understand its implications, and already know where it leads. It's like reading a book that everyone else is skimming, noticing the foreshadowing that makes the ending unavoidable. The kicker is, the small things are often the most telling. A shrug, a smirk, a moment of hesitation. They reveal intentions and tendencies that words never fully convey. That's why your predictions seem impossible to others. They didn't see the invisible signals, the micro-changes that spell out the outcome with brutal clarity. You notice what's too small for them to care about, and in that noticing lies your advantage. By the time the situation fully unfolds, everyone else is reacting in shock, scrambling to catch up. You, however, were never surprised. You saw it coming because you took the time to notice what everyone else considered nothing. And that's what makes you look like you predicted it all, when in reality you just refused to miss what no one else thought mattered. Number 4. You're not emotionally attached to being right. That's why you usually are. The reason people often think you're some kind of psychic isn't because you crave being right. In fact, it's quite the opposite. You don't need validation to feel justified, which frees you to see situations as they actually are instead of how you wish they were. Most people distort reality to protect their feelings or preserve a story they've convinced themselves is true. You don't do that. You don't inflate possibilities, you don't sugarcoat motives, and you don't ignore warning signs just to feel comfortable. That freedom from emotional attachment is exactly why your observations tend to land with such precision. You watch, you notice, and you process without letting pride, fear, or desire tangle with the facts. When someone says one thing but does another, you don't wrestle with wanting their words to match their actions. You register the discrepancy. When a pattern emerges, you note it without twisting it into what you hope will happen. That makes your predictions feel effortless, because they aren't guesses. They're conclusions drawn from pure observation, unmarred by the bias of hope or fear. Most people can't handle being right without ego attached. They want the credit, the acknowledgement, the applause. You, on the other hand, are indifferent to being seen as correct, and that detachment makes your insight sharper. You're not trying to convince anyone, not trying to prove yourself, not defending a point for the sake of pride. That calm, detached clarity is like a lens that filters out all the noise, all the emotional interference that clouds judgment for everyone else. That's why when things unfold the way you foresaw, it shocks others. They assume accuracy comes from some dramatic internal effort, when really it comes from simple neutrality. You weren't emotionally desperate to be right, so you could actually see the truth. Your mind wasn't busy defending or hoping or avoiding. It was simply observing, connecting, and understanding. And because of that, your clarity hits where theirs misses, leaving everyone else scrambling to make sense of what was obvious all along. Number 5. You see trajectories, not moments. What separates you from everyone else isn't that you notice details. It's that you think in timelines. While most people focus on what's happening right now, you're already seeing the chain reaction. Every action, every word, every subtle choice is a link in a longer sequence, and you're connecting them before anyone else even realizes the links exist. That's why your predictions feel impossible to others, because they're only reacting to moments while you're reading the full story. People get caught up in the present. They obsess over one comment, one gesture, one event, and treat it as isolated. They forget that humans are creatures of habit, and that patterns repeat themselves like clockwork when the environment and motivations remain the same. You don't make that mistake. You see the first domino fall, and you already know how the next 3 are going to land. That understanding doesn't require luck or intuition. It requires attention, analysis, and a willingness to follow the trajectory where it leads, no matter how uncomfortable the endpoint may be. That perspective makes you quietly dangerous in the eyes of others. They're still celebrating small victories or panicking over small setbacks while you're already several steps ahead, anticipating consequences and outcomes before anyone else is even considering them. You aren't predicting randomness. You're seeing the flow of cause and effect, and you're patient enough to watch it unfold. It also means you notice when something is off before anyone else does. A single inconsistent behavior in someone's actions can signal a bigger deviation down the line, and you catch it immediately. You understand that today's minor frustration is tomorrow's inevitable problem. You don't react impulsively. You watch the trajectory, and that makes your interventions, when they come, precise and undeniable. When people finally see what you saw coming, they're stunned. Not because the future was impossible to know, but because no one else was paying attention to the paths forming in front of them. While everyone else was living in isolated moments, you were observing the currents of reality, mapping the direction, and quietly waiting for confirmation. That's why you don't predict moments. You see the whole journey before anyone else even starts the first step. Number 6. People think you're negative, but you're just unfiltered. The reason people often misjudge you isn't because you see too much. It's because you say too much that everyone else is pretending doesn't exist. Most people live in a fog of politeness, excuses, and selective attention. They avoid saying what's true because the truth is uncomfortable, inconvenient, or socially messy. You don't play that game. You call things as they are, and that honesty, stripped of sugarcoating or approval-seeking, makes people uncomfortable. That's why they label you as negative, when in reality, you're just refusing to participate in collective denial. Your clarity looks like cynicism to those who want to avoid responsibility. When you point out a behavior, a flaw, or a predictable outcome, they hear criticism instead of insight. They feel tension because your words expose a reality they've been choosing to ignore. Most people want reality to match hope, desire, or convenience. You refuse to bend reality to fit someone else's comfort level. That refusal makes you sharp, precise, and yes, sometimes unwelcome. Being unfiltered isn't about being dramatic or loud. It's about refusing to dilute what's obvious. You notice inconsistencies in words and actions, repeated patterns of mistakes, and the choices that lead to predictable failure. You articulate these observations without hesitation because you don't need applause or validation to justify them. The truth is already self-evident. Your job is simply to acknowledge it. That kind of honesty is rare, and because it's rare, it triggers strong reactions. People who have spent years lying to themselves or others suddenly feel exposed. They didn't expect someone to observe without bias, and they certainly didn't expect someone to speak without apology. That's why your negativity lands with weight. It isn't personal, it's reality. And reality doesn't negotiate. The fascinating part is, your unfiltered perception eventually earns its own respect. People may initially bristle at your bluntness, but over time they start to see the accuracy behind it. They realize that what felt like negativity was actually the clarity they were too afraid to face. You're not negative. You're simply aligned with reality in a way most people can't handle. Number 7. You've been wrong before, and you studied your mistakes relentlessly. Accuracy isn't born from luck or some mysterious gift. It's built from experience, especially the kind that leaves a mark. You've been wrong before. You've misread situations, misjudged people, and miscalculated outcomes. Those moments didn't break you, and they didn't scare you into silence. Instead, you dissected every misstep like it was a puzzle with a missing piece, and you refused to let the lesson escape unnoticed. That relentless study of your own mistakes is what sharpens your insight. Most people avoid their errors because they hurt. They bury them, make excuses, or blame circumstances. You, on the other hand, treat mistakes as data points. Every wrong prediction, every misjudged action becomes part of a mental database of human behavior, triggers, and outcomes. You pay attention to what went wrong, why it went wrong, and how it could happen again. That's why, over time, your understanding feels almost preternatural. It's not intuition, it's cumulative experience processed with ruthless honesty. The beauty of this approach is that it teaches you patience. You stop expecting perfection from yourself or from the world. You understand that being wrong is part of seeing clearly. Every error is a lesson, and every lesson increases your ability to recognize patterns that others overlook. By studying your mistakes, you're not just avoiding repeat failures, you're learning the subtle signals that precede them. You're noticing the tiny inconsistencies, the small behaviors, the hidden motivations that make outcomes inevitable once they're set in motion. That history of being wrong and learning also gives you humility, a quiet kind of confidence. You don't need to force being right or prove a point for validation. You know the truth will emerge in its own time, and your record of observation ensures you'll notice it before anyone else does. When people see you call a situation correctly, they assume it's some natural talent. What they don't realize is that it's the result of countless moments you got it wrong, sat with the discomfort, studied it, and used that knowledge to anticipate what no one else could. Your insight is forged in the fires of your own errors, and that's why it hits with such undeniable precision. Number 8, you listen to what people avoid saying. The truth isn't always in words. Most people think that understanding comes from what is said, but the real insight lives in what isn't. You notice the gaps, the pauses, the hesitation, the things people try to hide or avoid admitting. While everyone else is focusing on the story people tell, you're observing the cracks in that story, the parts they skip over, the subtle signals that reveal their real intentions. That's where the advantage comes from, and it's why your perspective seems almost uncanny. People don't want to face their own omissions, and they don't want to hear yours either. They get uncomfortable when someone spots the things they're trying to keep quiet, and that discomfort is exactly what gives you power. Listening carefully to the unsaid means you're reading between the lines of behavior, tone, and timing. You pick up when someone says, "Fine," but their voice doesn't match the word. You notice when someone promises something casually, but their energy betrays doubt. Most people miss these signals entirely, choosing convenience over observation. It's not about paranoia or over-analyzing. It's about paying attention to the information everyone else disregards. People speak half-truths because the full truth is inconvenient or exposing. You see it, track it, and store it as part of the larger picture. You understand that silence, avoidance, and deflection are not empty. They're clues. They tell you more than the carefully constructed words ever could. That skill makes your predictions feel effortless. Others are reacting to what was said, but you're reacting to what was left unsaid. When outcomes unfold, it's clear to everyone else, but you've already been aware all along. You've been reading the subtext, the tension, the hidden signals, and connecting the dots that no one else noticed. By the time everyone realizes what's happening, the picture is already complete in your mind. The subtle things people avoided saying aren't subtle to you. They're loud and clear. That ability to catch the unsaid is what turns ordinary observation into extraordinary foresight, and it's why your insight seems impossible to everyone who ignored the silent messages all along. Number 9. You're comfortable being early, even when it costs you social approval. There's a quiet power in being the first to notice, the first to understand, the first to see a pattern before anyone else does. The problem is, being early rarely feels rewarding at the time. You've been there, pointing out something obvious that everyone else ignored, and instead of appreciation, you got skepticism, eye rolls, or outright dismissal. It stings, but you've learned to accept it. You've grown comfortable being ahead, even when it isolates you or makes you the target of doubt. That's the hidden edge most people never develop. Being early isn't just about timing, it's about perception. People are wired to value what confirms their beliefs, not what challenges them. So when you highlight what's coming, they see it as overreacting, overthinking, or being dramatic. Meanwhile, you've already calculated the trajectory, mapped the consequences, and acknowledged the truth without hesitation. You don't need validation because you've already accepted that clarity often comes with temporary isolation. That comfort with being early is what separates observation from prediction. There's also a strange resilience that comes from this habit. You stop relying on others to see what's in front of them. You stop waiting for confirmation or approval. You understand that truth doesn't bend for social acceptance, and outcomes don't care who believes them first. That mindset allows you to operate with precision and confidence, quietly tracking patterns while others scramble to catch up. Eventually, the payoff comes. When events unfold exactly as you foresaw, the same people who doubted you are left in awe, trying to process how someone could be so ahead of the curve. By then, the social cost of being early no longer matters. You've already been proven right, and your understanding has outlasted their skepticism. Being comfortable with early insight is uncomfortable for others because it challenges their sense of control. You don't wait for the world to catch up. You notice the signals first and act accordingly. That patience, confidence, and foresight, even in the face of doubt, is what makes your awareness feel almost impossible to them, even though you've simply refused to ignore what was already there. Number 10. You don't fall for intentions, you track behavior. People get fooled all the time because they trust what someone says they mean rather than what they actually do. Intentions are slippery. They're easy to fake, easy to exaggerate, and easy to misremember. You don't fall for that. You pay attention to what people consistently do, not what they promise, claim, or plan. Actions are the only language that doesn't lie, and once you understand that, predicting outcomes stops being a gamble and starts being almost mechanical. Most people live in a world of hopes and assurances. They cling to promises because it feels better than facing reality. They accept excuses because they want to believe in the narrative, not the facts. You, however, separate words from results. You notice patterns in how people act, how they react under pressure, how they behave when no one is watching. Those patterns reveal their priorities, their limits, and their true capabilities. That's why your insight often feels uncanny. You're not reading intentions, you're reading evidence. Tracking behavior instead of intention also makes you immune to manipulation. While others are swayed by charm, apologies, or sweet words, you stay grounded in observable truth. You notice when someone says they will do something, but the follow-through never comes. You notice when repeated promises collapse into repeated patterns of avoidance or contradiction. Every choice they make becomes data, and every repeated choice strengthens your understanding of what's actually going to happen. This focus on behavior rather than intention allows you to see outcomes long before anyone else does. While people are analyzing motives and debating sincerity, you're connecting dots that everyone else ignores. You don't need someone to explain themselves or justify their decisions. The evidence is already there, in their actions. When events unfold exactly as you anticipated, others are stunned, thinking it was luck or some special insight. In reality, it's just consistency meeting attention. You didn't fall for what someone wanted to be true. You followed what they actually did, and behavior, unlike words, never lies. Number 11. You understand that most outcomes are predictable. People just refuse to accept them. The world isn't as chaotic as most people pretend it is. Most outcomes aren't surprises. They're the natural result of repeated actions, decisions, and patterns that were visible all along. The problem isn't complexity, it's denial. People ignore the obvious because the truth is uncomfortable, inconvenient, or requires them to admit they were wrong. You don't play that game. You see things as they are, not as people wish them to be, and that's why your foresight feels shocking to others. What most people call unpredictable is really just a refusal to acknowledge the signs. They want exceptions, coincidences, miracles, anything that makes the outcome feel less inevitable. You, however, strip away the theatrics. You focus on patterns, tendencies, and repeated behaviors. You notice the signals that point toward a certain result, and instead of hoping for a different one, you accept the trajectory. That acceptance doesn't make you pessimistic, it makes you accurate. Understanding predictability also means understanding cause and effect in human behavior. People repeat mistakes, act on desires, and respond to pressures in ways that are almost formulaic. While others are blindsided when those predictable behaviors lead to consequences, you're already aware of the chain reaction. You know that certain words will trigger certain reactions, certain choices will lead to certain outcomes, and certain conflicts will end the same way they always do. That knowledge isn't magic. It's observation turned into understanding. The discomfort for everyone else comes from realizing that what you saw coming wasn't a lucky guess. It was logical, obvious, and in plain view the whole time. Most people simply refuse to see it. That's why your insight feels impossible. Not because you predicted something extraordinary, but because you acknowledged the ordinary with clarity, and ordinary people struggle to accept what's staring them in the face. By the time the outcome unfolds, everyone else is reacting in shock. You're calm, confident, and unsurprised. That's the silent power of recognizing predictability, seeing what everyone else refuses to admit, and quietly letting the world catch up to your understanding. Number 12. Your mind connects dots faster than people can process them. The reason your insight seems impossible to others isn't because you see the future. It's because your mind moves faster than theirs, linking details they haven't even registered yet. While everyone else is reacting to one event, one comment, or one action, you've already connected it to multiple past occurrences and projected what it means for what comes next. That speed, combined with attention to patterns, makes your understanding feel almost instantaneous, and that's why people are left staring in disbelief. Most people process life moment by moment, emotionally reacting to what's in front of them without connecting it to what came before. They see events as isolated, random, or chaotic, and they treat outcomes as unpredictable. You operate differently. You notice relationships between actions, words, and subtle behaviors. You trace cause and effect, recognize repeated tendencies, and understand how one small shift will ripple into something larger. Your mind doesn't wait for confirmation. It anticipates it, mapping the path before others even realize there's a path to map. This kind of speed isn't just mental agility, it's a discipline. You've trained yourself to pay attention where others ignore, to hold multiple threads of information simultaneously, and to weigh probabilities without letting hope or fear interfere. That's why your predictions seem uncanny. They're not guesses, they're conclusions formed faster than the rest of the world can catch up. What makes this even more striking is how effortless it looks. You don't need dramatic explanations or endless deliberation. To you, connecting the dots is automatic because you've internalized patterns of behavior, cause and effect, and human tendencies. Others, however, scramble to make sense of what's already clear to you, and that gap between your perception and theirs creates a sense of shock, awe, and sometimes even disbelief. By the time people react, you've already moved several steps ahead. While they're still catching up to one piece of information, your mind has anticipated the next 3 moves. That's why your insight seems almost prophetic. Not because it's magic, but because you're thinking in a way the world isn't built to process, and most people never even try. Number 13. You don't need validation, which makes your insight dangerous to others. The reason your observations hit harder than anyone expects isn't just because you notice patterns. It's because you don't need anyone's approval to say what you see. Most people filter their insights through the lens of what others will think. They hesitate, they soften their words, they water down their perspective to avoid conflict or judgment. You don't do that. Your awareness exists independently of applause, recognition, or acceptance, and that independence makes your insight unavoidable and, for some, uncomfortable. When you speak from clarity, not ego. You're not trying to impress, convince, or compete. You're simply stating the truth as you understand it. That's why your accuracy doesn't feel like luck. It's not a show of talent. It's a consequence of honesty combined with observation. People around you often react with surprise or disbelief because they're used to needing social reassurance before making sense of reality. You don't need that safety net, and that freedom allows you to interpret situations in ways others can't. This kind of independence can be disarming. People are conditioned to respond to approval, to influence, to charm. When someone operates outside of that system, it disrupts their expectations. Your observations feel sharper because they're not softened by the fear of judgment, not diluted to appease others, and not swayed by emotional bias. You're free to see and say what's true, regardless of how it lands, and that creates a kind of quiet authority that people subconsciously recognize and react to. It's also why your insight often seems prophetic. While others are distracted by social dynamics, reputation, and perception, you are focused purely on evidence, patterns, and outcomes. You don't wait for confirmation or approval because your understanding isn't contingent on anyone else's recognition. You see, you analyze, you predict, and you let the truth unfold in its own time. By the time events play out, your independence has already proven itself. People are left in awe, realizing the accuracy wasn't about being lucky or gifted. It was about operating on a level where social validation doesn't cloud judgment. That's why your insight is so powerful. It's untouchable, undeniable, and uncompromised. Number 14. The real reason they're shocked. They realize you saw them clearly the whole time. What makes your insight so jarring to others isn't just that you predicted an outcome, it's that you understood them better than they understood themselves. People are uncomfortable when someone sees past the masks, the excuses, and the performances they rely on to feel in control. When they react with shock, it's not because you were clever or lucky. It's because they suddenly realize you observed them fully, without filters, without judgment, and without the need for approval. You saw everything that mattered, and they didn't expect anyone to. Most people live in self-created fogs. They gloss over contradictions in their own behavior, ignore the uncomfortable truths about their motives, and avoid acknowledging how their actions affect others. You didn't participate in that fog. You tracked behavior, patterns, and inconsistencies with quiet attention, compiling a complete picture of the situation and the people in it. That kind of clarity is rare, and when people are confronted with it, they feel exposed, even if you didn't intend to expose them. This realization hits hard because it comes with a mix of awe and fear. They didn't expect that someone could interpret the small signals they assumed were invisible. They didn't expect someone to connect the dots they themselves were pretending didn't exist. That's why your accuracy feels like a revelation. It's not about what you said or did. It's about the fact that you were quietly aware the whole time, observing without bias, tracking without interruption, and understanding without needing validation. By the time the outcome unfolds, the shock is complete. They are left confronting the truth. You weren't guessing. You weren't lucky. You weren't exaggerating. You were simply aware in a way that made their illusions impossible to maintain. And that is the most disarming thing of all. People realize that while they were performing, hiding, or rationalizing, you were seeing clearly. And that clarity has an undeniable power. They don't just notice that you were right, they notice that they were seen. And that realization is what leaves them stunned. What ties all of this together is simple, yet profound. Your insight isn't magic, luck, or some mysterious gift. It's the result of clarity, observation, and unwavering attention to truth that most people are too comfortable to notice. You don't guess outcomes. You don't react impulsively. You see patterns where others see chaos, behaviors where others see words, and trajectories where others only see isolated moments. Every prediction, every realization, every moment of no way. You knew this isn't an accident. It's the natural consequence of paying attention to what people hide from themselves, to what others dismiss as trivial, and to what the world refuses to admit is predictable. You've learned to operate outside the illusions that cloud judgment for most people. You understand that intentions rarely matter as much as actions, that silence often carries more truth than words, and that the smallest shifts often signal the biggest changes. You've been wrong before, and each misstep sharpened your perception, giving you the ability to see what's coming without bias or attachment. You aren't concerned with being liked, with validation, or with social approval. That detachment allows you to see clearly, act decisively, and interpret reality in ways that leave others stunned. The power in all of this is subtle but undeniable. People may dismiss, ignore, or even ridicule your awareness in the moment, but time consistently proves that clarity outlasts disbelief. While others scramble to catch up to the truth, you are already several steps ahead, quietly observing, connecting, and understanding in ways that feel almost prophetic, not because you are extraordinary, but because you refuse to participate in collective blindness. This is why your insight shocks people, not because you're lucky or dramatic or overly analytical, but because you see what they refuse to admit, you understand what they overlook, and you track the patterns that they deny exist. And when the outcome unfolds exactly as you foresaw, the shock isn't about the result. It's about the truth they ignored, the reality they avoided, and the fact that you were aware all along. If you found yourself relating to this, if you see the clarity in your own observations, or if this gave you a fresh perspective on how to read the world, make sure you subscribe to the channel so you never miss insights like this. Like this video if it opened your eyes, comment below with your thoughts or experiences, and share it with someone who needs to understand the power of seeing clearly when everyone else is blind. This is the kind of awareness that changes how you move through the world, and it's time more people start noticing it. God bless you.